Hello and welcome to the July edition of the Bloody Scotland Book Club, or as I call it, Have We Got Books for You? My name is Douglas Skelton and I'm the guest chair this month, and I like to think of myself as a well-upholstered, if slightly frayed, easy chair with a spring that's gone. We've got a totally terrific trio of top tipsters here tonight to tease and tantalise you with a triptych of tremendous titles. And that message was brought to you by the letter T, in case you didn't notice. It was going to be F, but we're pre-watershed. So our great panel tonight comprises of Suze Clarke-Morris, who's coming from exotic Worcester, Louise Fairbairn, who has dragged herself from her bed of pain to come with us from Edinburgh and surrounding areas, and Jonathan Whitelaw, who is broadcasting complete with his tie from sunny Edmonton in Canada. My goodness, we're an international bunch tonight. And the books we're going to discuss this evening are Block 46 by Johana Gustawsson, On Beulah Height by Reginald Hill, and Emily Noble's Disgrace by Mary Paulson-Ellis. So a great lineup of panelists and a fantastic lineup of books for us on the July edition of the Bloody Scotland Book Club. And we're going to go over to Jonathan first, who is going to introduce Emily Noble's Disgrace by Mary Paulson-Ellis.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Doug. That was breathtaking. I think the rest of the panelists will agree with me on that one. Yes, I have the absolute honour of introducing Emily Noble's Disgrace by Mary Paulson-Ellis, of course. I always get really nervous with these types of things because I don't want to give away spoilers. So I have the pre-prepared synopsis from the back of the book to read everybody, just to give you a little taster of it. So as follows. When trauma cleaner Essie Pound makes a gruesome discovery in the derelict Edinburgh boarding house she is sent to clean, it brings her into contact with a young policewoman, Emily Noble, who has her own reasons to solve the case. As the two women embark on a journey into the heart of the forgotten family, the investigation prompts fragmented memories of their own traumatic histories, something Emily has spent a lifetime attempting to bury and Essie a lifetime trying to lay bare. Now that is as tantalising as I think book synopses come. I really enjoyed this. And that's not just because I've had the pleasure of working with Mary Paulson-Ellis on various things and panels and festivals and on the radio and stuff like that. And I think she would probably kill me if I didn't say that I really enjoyed it. But I did genuinely really enjoy it. It's a beautifully written book. I actually thought, and it'll be interesting to see if the rest of the panel agree with me. I actually thought that the way that this book was written in particular felt a bit more almost literary fiction, as opposed to, your traditional sort of crime genre, police procedural fiction. If indeed there is a divide between the two styles of it. Mary's a wonderful writer. She really is, and she doesn't need me or anybody else telling her that. But the beauty of which this book was written really sort of stuck with me in terms of the language. Portobello obviously plays a massive part in Edinburgh as a whole, and I know invariably you read books that are set in Edinburgh and Portobello, and indeed anywhere in Scotland, anywhere in the world, and you have to say that hackneyed line of the city becomes a character in its own right. But it really did in this novel. Again, without going into too many sort of details, there's a scene right at the start. In fact, it's the sort of body discovery, and it's really stuck with me. Actually, I read this one first for the assignment this month. I read this one first, and it stuck with me the whole month or so since we got it. And it's that image of the salt air blowing in through the cracks of the window, and aging the corpse. And there's a way, and I mean, I'm in no way, shape, or form doing it justice, but the way that it describes how that air tightens the skin around the old woman's face and body and corpse, essentially. I mean, horrible, a horrible image, but told in such a way that is beautiful, genuinely beautiful. Yeah, and I'll be interested to see if the rest of the panel sort of picked up on that. But it was, I think that's the yeah, I think that was my sort of takeaway, from this particular book.
But before we get the views of Louise and Suze, we've got a reading from Mary herself for everybody to enjoy.
Hello, my name's Mary Paulson-Ellis, and this is Emily Noble's Disgrace. The bones fell from the ceiling as though from the sky. A tibia, a fibula, the notches of a spine, scattering about her feet like spillikins just waiting for the game to begin. Dust and grit and flakes of ancient paint circled above her, glinting in the air as though she was standing in a universe, somewhere amongst the darkness and the never-ending stars. Then the dust began to settle, a thin coil of grey to add to all the rest. It settled on her arms clinging to her skin. It settled on her clothes caught in the weave. It settled on her hair, turning it the colour of an old woman's. It settled on the tips of her shoes. The bones were small things, not much longer than the span of her hand. A scattering of something old, something long since dead and buried, risen to the surface now. She stared at the little nubs, the hollow flutes, at the patch of floor turned into a graveyard about her feet. Then she crouched, reached a hand to touch, knew at once that these were the remains of a child. Portobello, Edinburgh Seaside, 2019. We enter by the backyard, a small space surrounded by a fence rotting from the ground up. Inside, the concrete area is piled with junk. I can see old chair frames and scraps of desiccated carpet underlay, 1,000 bin bags appearing from amongst a thick stand of willow herb. The willow herb is pretty, flowers still blooming, though even I know the season is almost ended now. Daphne goes ahead, disappearing for a moment amongst a craze of thistledown. We follow, a narrow trail hacked out by the police a day or so before. The tall stems have been bent and pushed aside where the police tramp their way in and tramp their way out. I touch my hand to the nearest blossom, pink juice on my thumb. Who called the police? That's what I want to know. When the owner of the property had already waited 2 years for somebody to come.
Well, there we are. Okay, I'm just I'll just get this right out there just now. Extreme bookshelf envy. Got to say, I know that every crime writer watching this was looking at those shelves to see if they could see their own books. I couldn't, so I'll just take a wee note of that for when I see you. Okay. So, Louise, how did you feel about Mary's book?
Well, I live in Portobello, so on the one hand, it's a bit weird because if I could leave the house right now, which obviously I can't, I could 5 minutes along the road and I'm standing outside the house where she set this. I'm 5 minutes from all of the Portobello settings that she uses. So it's weird, but it's also incredibly fascinating because it's not a place that's, Edinburgh as a city is in a lot of crime fiction, but Portobello really isn't, despite the fact that it's, 20 minutes on the bus and it's the beach. Hey, it's the beach, come visit. And so it's lovely to see a different part of Edinburgh. I find that there's so many writers basing books in Edinburgh, and yet they're all a different part of Edinburgh. And I love that. There's so much in Edinburgh that you can pick and choose and use, that nobody's using the same thing twice. So it's great. But that opening line about the bones falling from the ceiling, oh my God, I read that and was just like, ah. And then you can't stop reading after that, can you? You just want to keep going. And it just, as Jonathan said, it feels very literary, and it's a very careful, thoughtful style Mary Paulson-Ellis has. I did a little interview with her recently on my blog in which she said she enjoys the rewriting and the editing process almost more than the first draft. And I think you can tell that. It comes over in just the way she really really shapes every sentences and chooses all her words so carefully. And there's little bits of repetition. The willow herb pops up again and again and things like that. And just, it's just so beautifully put together. And then you get this chunk at the last kind of, I don't know, the last quarter maybe, when she starts going back through the ages of Portobello, centered on the boarding house, which is where the woman's body was found. But it was interesting to me, who knows nothing about the place where I live, to see how the Portobello as a place changed and the attitudes of people here changed, as well as what was going on in the boarding house, which I don't want to give anything away, but you're sort of working it out as it goes backwards, and then you get right to that earliest piece, and it's just like, yeah, okay, definitely what we figured was going on. Kind of didn't want to see it, but you knew it was coming.
Yeah. Mary said that when she was planning the book, etc., and trying to figure out where the bones might be found, that she was reminded of a conversation that she had with a neighbour about the time they spent living in a boarding house in Portobello in the 1950s. And she felt that appealed to her because Portobello is such a distinct part of Edinburgh.
Yeah.
These are words, by the way, with its own history. And a boarding house itself has a many-layered history of its own because of all the people who have washed through. And as I said, these are my words, these are Mary's, and you can tell because they're really, really good. And so, and I think she's captured that. And also the idea of bones that Jonathan talked about comes from a true story when she was told about a house renovation in the city where human bones were found in a ceiling. So she's used that as well. And we do that as crime writers. We're very much magpies. We pick and we sort and we say, well, we'll have that, we'll have that, we'll have that. We can move it all together. Suze, what about you? How did you find it?
Yeah, I would agree. It feels very literary. The precision in there, the details, the scene setting is just exquisite. I mean, I'm sure we all walked through that house full of stuff and we could almost reach out and touch things. It's so precise, it's so detailed, it's so careful. It's I was overwhelmed by all of that, really. And there's a lot of sadness there, but it's written in such a beautiful way that which actually, one of the other books I would say is very similar in that respect. But I was most touched by the precision and the use of just coming back to objects, which I know inspires. She's quite inspired by objects when she writes, because I heard her speak about that. And so the doll and there's the doll and lots of different objects. I just thought the precision was incredible.
Yeah. What about the characters? Because you've got Mary's books are all standalones, but there are characters that thread through. And in this one, it's Essie Pound who's to the fore for much of it, and of course Emily Noble who comes into it. So the use of these extreme cleaners. What do you think about that? And I could do with these extreme cleaners in this house. What do you think about that?
Company name was brilliant.
Anybody?
Company name is brilliant. I think it's a fascinating thing to mine. I'm looking for the words. I mean, there must be so many stories around that. I thought Essie was kind of old soul. She came across as much older than she actually was. And a bit lost, I thought. And both of these women are kind of on the edge of, Emily's been shunned and Essie's just doesn't really mix. And so, they both struck me as quite lost. But the whole idea of extreme cleaning or trauma cleaning just sounds, it sounds immense.
There was one thing I think that we're all probably guilty of as readers and also as writers as well, is that you're constantly looking for another detective. You're constantly looking for someone who can justify being at crime scenes realistically, and the Extreme Cleaners, it was maybe about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, that the Extreme Cleaners sort of rose a bit more to prominence in the greater kind of wider consciousness, because there was a lot of reality TV shows. And I always think the mark of a great book is when you look at it from a writer's eye and you think, God, you know, I wish I'd done that. I wish I was capable of doing that. I wish I'd thought of that first. And I got that with this, you know, not just with the Extreme Cleaners, but obviously with the sheer weight of talent that Mary adds to the proceedings. I find it interesting actually that everybody, we all seem to be using words like elegant, beautiful, you know, gripping. That very, very rarely do you get that sort of combination. I think particularly when you're talking about crime, you know, at the end of the day, what we're talking about at the start of this novel is it's the discovery of an old woman who's dead. And been forgotten about essentially, and yet here we are using terms like beautiful, and as we heard from the reading from Mary as well, the way that it's described, you lose yourself in it. I felt I had my notes. I had to look at my notes there just during the reading, and I'd written in it that it's a book that makes you feel a lot more intelligent having read, because you come away from each session when you sit down to read it, you know, feeling that you've learned something, whether it's big words, whether it's elegant words, or just words in general. Yeah, it's interesting. I thought the characterization, just to go back to your point, Doug, I mean, I really like the characters. I don't know. Are you not meant to? I suppose that's always the question. Like I loved Essie's references to Granny Pound. Is it Granny Pound? I love those references. And again, you know, there's a sort of self-loathing there, and the way that it's described, certainly at the start of the book, it just makes your heart break for her, you know, and you know, the way that she looks at herself, the way that she regards herself, her image, you know, just master, you know, very, very subtle little nods and dealing with big picture issues that affect us all, I suppose, but doing with very, very subtle brushstrokes. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. In case you can't tell.
Yeah. Well, my notes on it were just this intense writing, strong characterization, careful pacing and plotting. So that's what I think. Louise, what about you?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was thinking about Essie there, and how I find both Essie and Emily highly relatable to painful degrees sometimes, which is, I suppose, a mark of good writing, but that's maybe says a lot about me as well. The thing that got me about Essie was when she has no memory of before Granny Pound. She went to Granny Pound when she was 5. And she doesn't, it's not so much that she spends the book looking for that memory, but it's just that gap has become something that she has to figure out and she has to carry with her. And I thought it was awful. And then there's that terrible scene where she thinks she's going to find out something. And in fact, she's not allowed to find out anything. Nobody's allowed to tell her what her name was, where she lived, who her parents were. Nobody's allowed to tell her this. It was so heartbreaking. And because, as Jonathan said, there's a lot of kind of self-loathing. She has a lot of pain to carry with her. And then to be given that, it's just horrendous. And I also know, I've read about that kind of thing, and it's true. You can't always have the information that you need to rebuild your life because it's part of somebody else's life. And what I love about this is that she gets a resolution. This is why crime fiction is wonderful, isn't it? Because in reality, you would just be left in limbo, whereas in crime fiction, you can give people a resolution that is realistic. It's not the word I'm looking for. I can't think of the word, but, you know, something that's appropriate and that feels good. There's a lovely scene towards the end with the girls on the beach, and that I feel that there's a thread of quite melancholy through a lot of this book, and that scene with the two of them on the beach, it's just so positive in comparison. It's just lovely. It's so nice to see.
Oh, I do like a bit of melancholy, to be honest. But did you notice that the character names? So we've got Essie Pound, Solomon Farthing, and Margaret Penny. So there's
Love that.
Now, I asked Mary if that was on purpose, and she said no. It was pointed out to her at some point, and then when she came to do essays, she kept it going with Pound, which I thought was really good that she hadn't actually noticed it herself.
Oh no, that's great.
And yeah, it's an excellent book, and I agree with it's on the literary side of crime fiction. And I see that we've got some comments here. We've got an international audience tonight, not just within the panel. We've got guests from Sweden and Nashville. So we might ask them to come on and give us a wee song, an ABBA song in the style of Dolly Parton, I think would be good. So, and Helen and Sari has said, sorry, just till I move this, so many different threads to the story in this book. Thoroughly enjoyed it, and we'll go back to read the preceding two, which is great. That's a great compliment for any author to get. And Louise Colvin has just ordered this from the library as we rave about it. So there we go. So that's great. Anybody else got anything to say about the book?
Read it. Read it now.
Read it. Yeah. Read it. Yep. Buy it. Love it.
Yep. Big hit. I would say. Yes. So we'll move on to our next book. And for that, we go to Louise for an introduction, if her throat.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Just to last the pace.
Yeah. All right, let me just read the blurb off the back, because it's going to put it so much better than I could in my slightly fuzzy-headed state. They moved everyone out of Dendale that long, hot summer 15 years ago. They needed a new reservoir, and an old community seemed a cheap price to pay. They even dug up the dead and moved them too. But 4 inhabitants of the valley they couldn't move, for no one knew where they were. 3 little girls had gone missing, and the prime suspect in their disappearance too, Benny Lightfoot. This was Andy DL's worst case, and now 15 years later he looks set to relive it. It's another long hot summer. Another child has gone missing. And as old fears resurface, someone sprays the deadly message on the walls of Danby. Benny's back.
Yeah. So what we don't have, I mean, Reginald Hill sadly died about 10 years ago, so it's a bit difficult to get a reading from him. But what we do have is a clip from the BBC TV series. And here we go. Well, there we go. And before we go any further, I do have to apologise to anybody of a sensitive nature for the shirt that was worn here. I'm sorry if you had to turn down your colour. I do apologise. And it's just, watching that and having read the book, it's interesting how different a TV adaptation is to the book, because a lot of that was, it's fast cutting and the scenes are shorter and they cut back and forward. So, Louise, so this is the one that you've taken possession of.
Yeah.
Why do you love it so much?
Well, I first read it not long after it came out. I mean, it's the 98. So yeah, probably the thick end of 20 years ago. And it just really hit me. Just kind of everything about it. And coming back to it and rereading it, I've read hundreds of crime fiction novels, hundreds of police procedural novels in the meantime. And it doesn't have the impact it did then, but to me, it's still a really great novel. You think it's a police procedural, so you're just going to go whack straight in. There's going to be, dead body. There's going to be cops standing over it. We're straight into the case. But it's not. It's a really slow burn. Like it's the slowest of slow burn openings. You've got this whole chapter, which is a young girl looking back at 15 years ago when these 3 kids went missing, and the village was razed and then drowned. I love this opening line. They drowned the village as if it was a person. But you get a lot of scene setting before you get into it, but at the same time, that sort of sets you up for the whole book. It's slow paced, but it's carefully paced. There's tension all the way through it. There's lots of things going on that look a bit random. There's this fairy tale about a creature that comes and steals children. There's a musical concert in which we've got the lyrics for this Songs for Dead Children, which have been translated into English and are all to do with this place. And there's all these random things, but you just have to kind of go with it. And you know that at some point they'll all come together and they'll all make sense. But I suspect some people will not like the pacing of it, because it's quite a long book. I do apologize for that. I seem to be good at picking long books. And it wouldn't hurt to be 150 pages or 200 pages shorter, perhaps. But it's a whole thing. And I don't know. This one, I'm not very good at describing this one, I'm afraid. I just like it. I like the kind of elegiac feel to it. I like the melancholy of it. I love the fact that people do stand around and look at a horrible thing going on over here, and then they can look out at this amazing landscape. Because the Dales, even now, never mind in the 90s, the Dales is fabulous. And the Dales is also full of little modern communities. But, you take a step, take 10 steps away and you can look at the hills, and the hills haven't changed in centuries. The sheepfold at the top of Beulah High is probably the same one, more or less, as was there when it was first created in Anglo-Saxon times. Dale goes into this whole spiel about the name of the place. Things like that. I like that kind of ever-changing but never-changing to it. And the fact that you've got the then of 3 girls go missing and the now of 1 girl goes missing. And you're assuming that these are all linked. And they kind of are, but they're not in the way that you assume that they are. And I think I remember thinking about it when I was reading it at the weekend. And a lot of books are like a maze. So you go in, you can't see where you're going, except you get a little hint every now and again. But the point of a maze is that you get to the center. Whereas this is more like a labyrinth, where you know that you're going to get to the center, but there is only one path, but it takes a long time to get there. And it kind of depends what you want. If you want to go straight into the action, this isn't really the novel for you. If you want something that's just a little bit gentler read, slightly more literary read in some ways, because he does have a habit, Reginald Hill, of chucking in huge words all over the place. That's him resort to a dictionary a few times. And then you discover that they are exactly the right word for the occasion, which is great. But if you don't like that kind of thing, this is not the novel for you. Possibly some of the other ones in the series might be, because this is a little bit different to a lot of the series. But if you want something that's a bit slower and a bit, it takes its time and thinks about things, I think you should have a go at it. I think it's enjoyable.
Well, to be honest, I did find it a bit long. Just to get that out there.
Can't argue with that.
But then it's a common complaint with me with books, with TV series, and I do find that they're too long, because as all men know, girth is not everything. But it was incredibly well written, and the characterization is superb. And when I read it, I've forgotten the name of the actor who played DL.
Warren Clarke.
Warren Clarke.
That's it. I didn't see the series, but when I read it, I saw Warren Clarke as DL. So that's a good thing. But if it makes you feel better, Louise, or Lorraine, as I was calling you at the weekend, Gordon McGee says that it's such a great series, the DL and Pascoe books, but this is the best in the run. Suze, what do you think?
I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, going to be honest. I was put off by the length and the close type, but I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. It does meander, definitely. There's a lot happening, a lot of little things happening, a lot of people. There's a lot of characters, but they're all brilliant. And DL is such a strong, fine. I mean, he's fabulous, rich character. I love the dialogue. I love the dialect. I really enjoyed a lot of that. I could have done with it shorter, especially when I didn't finish it till this morning. But I definitely enjoyed it more than I expected to. I hadn't read any of the series before. I watched the telly and I have fond memories of that. And definitely see Warren Clarke as DL in this. And that's, I guess, because he did a splendid job and because he's described so well in the book. I mean, the characterization of him particularly is brilliant, and it's set in gorgeous countryside. So yeah, it wouldn't be my favourite of the three, but I enjoyed it a lot more than I expected to.
The writing is incredibly strong.
Yeah.
Never mind the length. The writing is strong, and there is a palpable sense of place. You feel
Yes.
as if you are in this place, but also of its time, because it's set in the 90s, and we need to remember that. So the past is a different country. We did things differently back then, and I can remember them. You three are far too young, but I remember going back then. What it was like. Jonathan, what were your views?
What I think is interesting, I like everybody else. I couldn't help but picture the TV, Warren Clarke and that image and that kind of late 90s BBC. I think it changed a bit. I do remember it. I seem to recall it being on Friday nights, and then I think it was moved to Sunday nights. I think it was moved about because it was on for years, wasn't it? It was on nearly a decade, I think, and very, 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 very fondly thought of and missed. And I read this and couldn't help but picture it with that slightly grainy, washed out suits, shirts and ties, he says, in a non-ironic sense, as we've just seen there. I pictured it looking like the 90s. And actually, I was a little bit worried coming on here and doing the discussion and thinking that was necessarily a bad thing. But actually, I've changed my mind, because you guys are all saying that you thought the same, and exactly as you said, Suze, it's a testimony to the adaptation, I suppose. It's a testament to the characterization by Reginald Hill. It surprised me. It really surprised me. I approached it again. I know that we shouldn't always compare it to the TV series. Obviously, we shouldn't do that. I remember the show being what it was, and it was obviously 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night on BBC One. I thought the book, the novelization, was a bit harder edged, particularly in the descriptions that Pascoe will give to DL. That's right. Yeah. There's things like he's described as the fat man and ton, like just sort of throwaway descriptions that are used to describe. And I actually thought it was quite mean. It came across as being quite a mean, if certainly appreciative, a term of endearment to a certain degree. But again, just the language. It entirely my fault going into it with a sort of almost a prejudgment that it was going to be almost word for word and like for like from the TV show, but far from it. Listen, I completely agree with everybody else. I think the way that the way the landscape's described, the crime itself. I'd never read any DL and Pascoe before this. This is the 15th book, I think. Louise,
something like that. It's quite a long way through. It does change. I went back and read some of the earlier ones last year, and DL doesn't change a huge amount, unsurprisingly, but Pascoe does change as it goes on. And I think a lot of the time you'll hear him calling DL like the fat man or whatever, and he's doing it in his head, or he's doing it with his colleagues. Doesn't do it to his face.
Yeah.
I think the two of them, you've got, it's the other thing that struck me is it's like Taggart, right? The original Taggart, you've got the old school, slightly abrasive, you've got the, nice shiny office worker hands, never done a day's hard labor in his life, graduate. And it's a massive clash of cultures, obviously. But I think they do develop a respect. And there's a lovely line from one of their colleagues somewhere in this book, describing, putting, this is how DL does it, this is how Pascoe does it, this is how Sergeant Wheel does it. They're all different, but they're all wanting the same thing, and they're all striving for good results. And sometimes you get it one way and sometimes you get it another way. And I think they're very carefully drawn as, to the DL and Pascoe, but then you've got Weald and Novello as well. And they're all very different types of cop, which is unusual. A lot of police novels, you get one or two, and then you get a team of random people in the background. So I love that they're all properly characterized as well. And also,
it goes back to William McIlvary Laidlaw, really, as well. They did the same, or he did the same with his. And I mean, character is everything, I think. Sorry, we've got another comment here from Leslie McLean, and it says, all those victims, but I always get more upset with a hurt dog. Yes, crime writing rule number 1, you do not hurt the dog. And that did upset me in the book.
Well, they do get the vet, however.
Yeah, it did. I mean, the dog wasn't killed, but it was I think it was more apparent in the book that the dog had been very, very badly kicked. So which was upsetting. And we've got Carol Mitchell, which is a name that is familiar to me. And it says, my favourite Hill book, fantastic. It's a long, warm bath of crime and literature.
Get that on the cover. Get that. That's your endorsement.
I should also...
On you go.
No, I was just going to say, we're talking about all these like beautiful, elegiac, literate. It's also really bloody funny in places.
Yes.
And I have to say, I gotta read just like one sentence.
Yeah.
Which is, it just struck me so badly. 15 years ago, offender profiling had been the job of a police artist, and even today, in certain parts of Yorkshire, it was an art practiced by consenting officers in private. I mean, there's little things like that all over the place.
Yeah, it is. And the dialogue is fabulous. I mean, although I think it's too long, that's just my view, but the dialogue is fabulous. And we've been corrected. It's by Louise Colvin. It's book number 17 in the series, and the first one was A Clubbable Woman, and that came out in 1970.
Yeah.
So it was a different world, Jonathan. I mean, we can't use. I think it's a danger if we're looking back at classic fiction to take the sensibilities of our part of the 21st century and try and impose it on the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s, or going back the 60s and the 50s. For me, as a lot of people know, I'm a big fan of Ed McBain, and you know, when you read them now, you think, oh God, you couldn't do that now. You really couldn't. But you've got to you've got to step back yourself in time, and that's where books are good. They are time machines. They can take us back.
Yeah, I agree. I think exactly as I said. I think the sort of using the term like fat man and ton to describe his colleague and someone that he works very, very close with. I did think that. I thought, you know, would you be able to get away with something like that if you're writing in 2022? Is it too mean? Could it be regarded as too mean? You know, even though the sentiment is there that it is a term of endearment, that's its characterization. Interestingly, I read The Hunt for Red October recently, and it's a very, very similar setup. You know, that's very much a techno thriller set in, well, it was published in 1984, the early 80s anyway, and it's not aged well, but mostly because it is such a reliance on the technology at the time, and you know, it goes on and on and on and on and on about technology now that's ancient history. I think with this, and maybe because it's closer, I mean, it's at least a good 10-15 years closer to today than something like The Hunt for Red October. And it's a completely different beast as well, obviously being a detective novel. I liked what you said, Louise. I liked that you said that, you know, you can sit back and you could be transported back to that time, and it conjures up memories that you have from that era, because I think it is a book very much set in its era, and almost as a sort of time capsule. You know, it's a perfectly preserved time capsule as to how things were done, and even watching as we saw the clip there, that does exactly the same. You know, that tie again. I know it's rich coming from me wearing a tie, but that tie that Warren Clarke had on there was, you know, it looked as if the 90s threw up on it, to use popular parlance. That's very much not me, but there you go. Must be getting old.
I'll just take a note of that, Jonathan.
Get that in the cover.
Jonathan has read Hunt for Red October, can now lecture on nuclear submarines. Okay. Right, so I would say overall the Reginald Hill book is a hit. with us, apart from me being a curmudgeon. So we'll move on to the third book, and Suze, it's Johanna Gustawsson's Block 46. So if you want to introduce it for us.
And talking about transporting us back in time, this one certainly does that. The blurb on the back: Falkenberg, Sweden. The mutilated body of talented young jewellery designer Linnea Blix is found in a snow-swept marina. Hampstead Heath, London. The body of a young boy is discovered with similar wounds. Buchenwald concentration camp, 1944. In the midst of the hell of the Holocaust, Erich Ebner will do anything to see himself as human again. Are the two murders the work of a serial killer, and how are they connected to shocking events at Buchenwald? Emily Roy, a profiler on loan to Scotland Yard from the Canadian Royal Mounted Police, joins up with Linnea's friend, French true crime writer Alexis Castelli, to investigate this puzzling case. They travel between Sweden and London, then deep into the past, as a startling and terrifying connection comes to light.
And in keeping with the incredible treats that the book club gives you, we've got Johanna Gustawsson herself reading an extract from it.
I'm very happy to be with you today to talk about Block 46, to read you an extract of Block 46. It's a very dear book to me, not just because it's the first in the Royal Castle series and my first, but because it honors the memory of the resistance in the Second World War, the heroes of the Second World War, and my grandfather, Simon Lagunas, was one of them. So I'm honoring his memory and his path in this book. So let me read you an extract. London, 7th of November 2013. The light from the 3 electric torches stripes across the pit. A perfect rectangle. 1 meter 30 in length, 50 centimeters in width. Made to measure. He picks up the spade, gathers earth and spreads it out in the hole. A single shovelful, and the legs are already covered. All that sticks out are the toes. Toes as smooth as pebbles, as cold as ice, that make him want to touch them with the tip of his fingers. Smooth and cold. He throws another pile of damp earth over the stomach. Some lands just below the thoracic cage, round the navel. The rest slides down the sides. A few more spadefuls and he will be all done. It had all been child's play. All of a sudden, he lets go of his spade and brings his muddy gloves up to his ears. Just shut up, will you? He spits the words out, his jaw frozen with anger. No, 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 stop shouting, stop! He kneels down beside the pit and places his hands against the collarless lips. Shh, shh, I said. His nose brushes across the ice-like cheek. Okay, I'll do it. I'll sing you a little song. I'll sing you Imse Vimse, but you must remain quiet. Is that understood? He stands up and shakes dirt from his trousers. Imse Vimse spindel klättra öfotron. He takes hold of the spade and throws another lot of earth across the torso. It sinks into the wide open gash running down from the chin to the sternal notch. Net faller ägnet spolla spinda bort. A spadeful over the face. The earth spills across the forehead, obscuring the hair, falling into the eye socket. Uppstiger solen, torka bortat regn. Imse vimse spindel klättra upp igen. The dirt race across the marble whiteness of the body to the rhythm of the nursery rhyme. He packs the final layer of earth tight and smoothes out, then arranges a bunch of brown winter leaves across the top with exaggerated, arrogant artistry. He walks away backwards, his eyes still fixed on the grave, then retraces his steps and kicks a few leaves around with his foot. He pulls one of the torches out of his parka pocket and, keeping its beam low, gets on his way.
Well, and just to be clear, it is not a musical. But more shelf envy there. So, Suze, what are your views?
This is a truly international affair, written by a French author married to a Swede they were living in London at the time. The present day action takes place in Sweden and London, and the historic timeline is in Germany and Sweden. And our two main characters are French and Canadian. So there's a truly international feel.
A bit like our panel tonight.
Yeah. This is the first of a trilogy with Alexis and Emily, and all of them have a dual timeline with a story into the past. This one is gruesome and brutal, horrific, and really difficult to read in places. It's really tough reading in places, but it's beautifully written. It's beautifully written, and the scene setting is too good sometimes, especially when we're in 1944. The scene setting is too good, and you've got two strong women, very, very different women in the lead. Our lead roles. Alexis is open and emotional and giving, and Emily isn't. She is so driven. Perhaps I don't know that she's on a spectrum, but she has that feel about her because she is so driven. Both of them have their past, which is hinted at through the book. But the present day, 1944 is absolutely horrific to read, painfully so. But the crimes in the present day timeline are gruesome, and they're described in enough detail for a wince at least, if nothing else. I found it very moving, very shocking, and with when everything comes together, it blew me away twice actually. Reading it the second time, I loved it as much as I did the first. It's not my favorite of the three actually, but it's so strong, and it's just so strong, so real, so and covers such a difficult subject, but I think does it very well.
Jonathan, what do you think?
I agree. I agree completely with Suze. I think the stuff in 1944 is it's compelling. It's dreadful, absolutely ghastly. I mean, the first chapter that we have in set in 1944 is it's abhorrent, but getting that sort of reaction out of a reader with a subject matter that's been covered so extensively by so many writers, the good, bad, and indifferent, something as traumatic as the Holocaust. I think having us using language like this as a panel and talking about it, and actually feel a bit peely-wally, as my late gran used to say. That's how I felt reading it, and you go through it again without going into any sort of great detail about it. You feel that you're going through it step by step, agonizing minute by agonizing minute. And then, of course, you cut to the modern day, well, technically modern day, and it's particularly at the start of it. It couldn't be further from it. You're plunged into this world of glamour and riches and expense and fabulous people wearing fabulous things. And I was just looking at my notes again, throughout the reading there, and it's a sort of classic page-turning thriller, isn't it? It's an international thriller that's almost become so saturated with these types of things that you become skeptical when you see that sort of blurb on a book going another international thriller. I've got it here. The exact way that it's described is an evocative and sweeping thriller, and I think that's absolutely spot on. I don't think there's any way that I could describe it any better than that, because while it has all the international treading and the glamour, and then this absolute horror from the 1940s, you can't help but keep reading, and you can't help but want to keep reading. And that's the sort of definition of a page-turning thriller, isn't it? And yeah, I loved it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I loved hearing it there, and particularly the Incy Wincy Spider. That's a favourite of my 18-month-old son at the moment. And I know it backwards, and it was lovely to hear it in a different language.
Well, before Louise, I should explain, because Johana mentioned her grandfather there, and it was that the whole story was inspired by her grandfather, who was a wood carver, a carpenter, and he believed very much in freedom, and he fought with the International Brigade in the Spanish Civil War, and then with the French resistance against the Nazis during the occupation. And he was part of the liberation force of Buchenwald, the concentration camp that is mentioned in the book. And there's an avenue that bears his name. He had a medal. He was a war hero, but he was always a bit mysterious to his family. She said he was never vocal about what he saw, what happened to him. And Johana took it upon herself to find out more. And the result filters into this book. And she felt that she had a duty of memory and passing on to the younger generation what happened, and particularly about Block 46 in Buchenwald, where the medical experiments were carried about. And to tell the story, and she wrapped it up into a crime story as well. She used some of the writing that her grandfather had actually done himself, but was never published. And I think that's fascinating, that there is a personal, she's not just written another serial killer story, that there is something personal here, and I think that comes across. And also using the west coast of Sweden, of Falkenberg, which she knows because she's married to a Swede, and she loves that area, and she wanted to use that. And I think there's something about that sets this apart. What do you think, Louise?
Yeah, I read the author's note about her saying it was to do with her grandfather's story, and that kind of clicked a lot of things into place for me, because I was reading it feeling parts of it are so, as Sue said, it's so hard to read. It's so horrible, all this stuff from the 1944-45. And it felt immaculately researched. It felt believable. And it's something that we should be talking about now, because the people who were there then, who survived it, are dying off. That generation is going to be gone soon, and we need to remember all this stuff. But I was also kind of, while I was reading it, thinking about the idea of who can tell what stories. Is it your story to tell it? Does it have to be yours, or as long as you do a good job of it, is it okay to do that? And of course, then you get to the end and go, author's note, and fantastic. But it just made me so uneasy reading this. I think because it's not something you read in a standard crime novel or thriller or anything. It's just, and because it's real. She doesn't have to make it up. You just go and look it up, and it's there. All the atrocities are there. The medical experiments, all those things are just so awful. But at the same time, they are very compelling. I was desperate to find out, because here's the thing in 1944, here's the thing now. There's got to be some kind of connection. I could not, for the life of me, figure it out. And then you get closer to it and think, oh yeah, okay. And then, oh yeah, I'm sorry, enjoy is not the right word in the slightest, but I couldn't put it down.
It's very, very harrowing.
It's very hard read, but it's an incredible read, and it's an incredible piece of work. I don't know how she could have written that. It must have been incredibly difficult to write.
Yeah, because Johana is such a lovely person as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, another couple of comments here from viewers. Louise Colvin said, again, just ordered from the library, and what a lovely reading. And yeah, I think we can agree we could listen to Johana reading the phone book. And Trish Dudley Tannehill says, loved this book, very compelling. And I think that's the word.
Yeah,
it really is. So that's another hit for us tonight. And that's actually our last book for the evening, but the book club will be back next month, And in keeping with Bloody Scotland's policy of helping along fledgling authors, next year's chair is a new one to me. Just need to check the name. Some young person called Caro Ramsey, and I think we have her here to talk about what the books for next year's book club, next month. Sorry.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah, can't see you.
Can you see me?
I can't. No.
Can you see me now?
Yay!
Yeah. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
And I was a bit disappointed because I was supposed to be on December hosting the book club, and they brought it forward to August. And I was going to wear my Santa Claus hat, but I am once again denied. We've got 3 fabulous books. We've got the first of the Skelf series from Douglas Skelton. No, not Douglas Skelton, a proper writer, Doug Johnson. That's the one, Doug Johnson. And then we've got Samir Mayer, The Can, which I've heard described as The Godfather, Mario Puzo. It's like that book for today. And Donna Leon. And Donna Leon is really interesting because she's 80, and that makes her slightly younger than Douglas Skelton, and is still writing, so that's good. Her 31st Brunetto book, Give Unto Others. So I think there's a fantastic selection there, and I'm really looking forward to it. The last Wednesday in August.
There we are. Thank you, whatever your name is. So we'll be looking forward to that. And we're coming up to the end, but very, very quick mention. First, thank you to everybody for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you to the panel, Suze Clarke-Morris, Louise Fairbairn, Jonathan Whitelaw. I think thank you for Cara Ramsey, but I'm not terribly sure. But just to mention that Bloody Scotland, put this in your diaries, is taking place between September the 15th and the 18th. The tickets are now on sale. The programme is available to have a look at. Don't miss it. It's a great festival in Stirling. Absolutely fabulous. And I'll be there. So hope to see you there. And tune in next month for the Bloody Scotland Book Club. Thanks very much.